Hey guys, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and this is part 7 of our point-and-click tutorial series for Unity. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how to give our player control using the mouse to look around, look left and right and up and down in our scene, rather than just freezing the camera in whatever position we happen to start it in. So to start this, we're actually going to be using one of Unity's scripts that they include in one of their standard asset packages that does a lot of what we needed to do. We're just going to customize it a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do, though, is create kind of a holder for that, for the code we're going to be borrowing. So let's start by creating a new C# script. And you can call this something that makes sense, like mouse P.O.V. or look control or something like that. The only thing I would recommend not naming it is MouseLook, and you'll see why in a minute. That's actually the script that we're going to be borrowing from. So we don't want to create any conflicts there. I'm just going to call mine mouse P.O.V. Hit enter. And we're going to add this right to our camera rig itself. As soon as we can do so, there we go. Because it's really going to be, taking in the information and telling it right to the camera rig. It's going to tell this y-axis and this x-axis which way they should be looking around. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go into assets and say import package and down to characters. Let that decompress. And we don't need most of that. We don't need almost any of this. We really just need this one, this MouseLook script. And then we'll import that. And we are going to get an error down here about a namespace that we're not including, and that's fine because we're going to, part of the adjustments we're going to make to the script are that we don't need this cross-platform input. So let's go, though, into this scripts folder. You'll see it's standard assets, characters, first-person character, and then scripts, and that's finally where our MouseLook script is hiding. We'll open that up. And we'll also open up, in our basic scripts, our mouse POV. So in MouseLook, we want basically everything inside of this MouseLook class. So we'll start right here at public float x sensitivity and go all the way down, including this clamp rotation script, all the way down to there. And we'll copy that, and we can paste all that right inside of our mouse POV class. Now with that done, we can actually get rid of this MouseLook class. We don't need this anymore, or this script. So I'm going to go right up to this standard assets, the root folder here, and I'm going to delete that. Now we jump back into Mono Develop, and we still obviously have this cross-platform input manager issue. So we'll fix that first. Solve the immediate problem first, and we're just going to change that to input. It's actually got the exact same function call, getAxis mouse X and getAxis mouse Y. But we can just say input instead because we're not worried about using a touch control or anything like that. So input will work just fine for us. Now there are a few other things we need to change throughout here. First thing, how the MouseLooks class that Unity creates is that it's going to pass in a transform for the character and for its camera, and we're going to change that out. We're really going to actually talk to it directly within the class itself. So we can delete this initialization. And we can also delete the parameters here inside of look rotation. What we do need, however, is a way to get to the camera rig class that's also attached to this object. And we can do that pretty easily. We're just going to put in another private variable here. And we'll say private camera rig. And we'll just call it rig. And then we can create a quick start class, or start function rather. And we'll say rig equals get component camera rig. And so that will grab that for us. Now if you want, what you can do is you can create a require component up here so that you're making sure that whenever you put this mouse POV on something, it has a camera rig. In fact, we'll do that. It's better to be safe than sorry. So we'll say require component type of camera rig. So now we can't add this script to something that doesn't have a camera rig, or it'll just automatically add a camera rig to that object. So now down here we'll see that both in our variables up here, and it's referring a lot to this character and this camera, because this is really designed for a first-person game where you're walking around and looking around with a character, and then that character has a camera attached to it, which is sort of what we're doing, but if you recall in our camera rig class, we're just calling that y-axis and x-axis. So we can actually, I want to change these names. And the easiest way to do that is to refactor them. So if we right-click on M character target rot and go refactor rename, we can change this to whatever name we want. This is going to be the one that controls the y-axis of our camera movement. So I'm just going to call this y-axis. And I'm going to use a little bit of a different naming convention. I had done in the camera rig, I had done this y_axis. I'm going to keep it a little bit different just so there's no confusion when we're typing it out and assigning one to the other. Likewise, for the M camera target rotation, I'm just going to change that. And you can also hit Control-Shift and R rather than right-clicking and going to Refactor to rename things. And so for this one, I'm just going to call that X-axis. So that sets us up there, and you'll notice that renames everything inside of here. Now we also have this character and this camera rotation, and this is actually where we're going to be assigning what the rotation should be in the game state. And we can't, unfortunately, if we try renaming this with refactoring, it doesn't work. We don't have that same availability, so we need to actually just rename these. And what these are going to be is we don't have a transform that's a character, but what we have is a transform that is this y-axis. So we are going to get our rig that we wired up here, and we're going to get its y-axis. So basically, wherever we have character written, there's 3 locations. We're going to say rig.y-axis. Do that here. And lastly, down here. And same thing for camera. But this is the x-axis. So we're going to change each of these to rig.x-axis, rig.x-axis, and same one here. So now what this is doing, basically, is when we call this look rotation, it's going to determine the amount of rotation in both the y and the x based on how we're moving our mouse. And it's a little funky because the y is based on how you're moving the x on the x plane, and the x rotation is based on how you're moving on the y plane. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because when you move your mouse left to right, that's affecting the axis that is up and down, which is the y-axis, because it's kind of rotating like a globe on that north-south pole axis. And likewise, it's the opposite for the x. So that's why that's mouse x and mouse y for the opposite rotations. So once we get that number, what the x and the y rotation amounts are, then we're going to actually change the existing rotation of our camera rig, both the y and the x pieces, and doing that by multiplying 2 quaternions together. The current one times whatever the change is. And so for the y one, it's only the y, it's 0 on x and z, and for the x one, it's the negative x and then 0 for y and z. If we're clamping vertical rotation, we quickly run it through that, so that basically will say, oh, if you're past where you should be, set you back to your ceiling or your floor. And then there's also an option if you want to do smooth movement, or if you just want to do directly to how the mouse is moving. And that really takes care of all of our mouse looking around. However, right now, if we were to start this, it wouldn't do anything because we're never actually calling this look rotation. So we need to do one more thing, which is track when we are doing what we want to do to look around. And how I'm setting up my game is that when you click down and hold down and drag the left mouse button around, that's when you actually look around. It's not going to just be always happening. And it's I feel like clicking the right mouse button is a good solution for that. So how we're going to track that is with our update function. We're going to say void update. And then we want 2 things. We want, is the mouse button being held down, and is the mouse moving? So that's it's kind of a double if statement. And so for the first one, is the mouse being held down? We can get that using a simple input.getMouseButton. And we'll say 0 because we're looking for that left mouse button to be held down. And then at the same time, we also need, so we need an and here, we need to see, is the mouse moving? And we actually have two functions that are already doing this down here, the input.getAxis mouse X and getAxis mouse Y that are doing that. So as long as one of those is happening, then the mouse is moving and we can proceed with this function. So we can do that by creating kind of a nested parentheses and now doing a second Boolean check, which is going to be input.getAxis mouse X does not equal 0, meaning there is some sort of movement happening there. It's great. It's not just static in the x-axis. And the exact same thing, but for the y-axis. So if at least one of these is happening, if the mouse is moving in one of these two directions, then we want to move the camera. So if we're holding down the button and the camera is moving in some direction, then this is where we're going to actually do our look rotation. And so we'll say call look rotation. Now there's one other thing we do need to do though when we do this, which is that what this program does is it takes our current rotation and then modifies it. So we need to make sure we're setting that current rotation when we start to rotate, especially because if we're moving from node to node, that might have changed from the last time we've done this, and we don't want to have some weird jerking of the camera. So in order to do that, we're just going to quickly say y rotation equals rig.y-axis. Why is that giving me a funny... Oh, because we need probably one more parenthesis here. That does that from time to time. Oh, and not y rotation. We want y-axis here. Y-axis dot rig dot equals rig dot y-axis dot local rotation, and x-axis equals rig dot x-axis dot local rotation. And so, like I say, that's just setting so that this has the most recent information to start moving the camera based on. So with all of those changes, clean this up a little bit, we should be able to jump back into here now, and if we hit, I'll save our scene and hit play, and we should see now that if I start dragging with the mouse, we look around. We can look left and right, up and down, wherever we want to. Now this is a little bit slow right now. I'm getting not a lot of turn for the amount of mouse movement I'm doing. And that's pretty easy to change. If you look in your camera rig, you'll see that there's these sensitivities, so you can increase your sensitivity by whatever you'd like. So I'll bump that up to 4. And Y sensitivity maybe up to 5. And there we go, we're moving a little bit faster now. Now, like I was saying about that clamp vertical rotation, this is something that I find is pretty useful because if you go, we're also still able to click on the table and look around from there. You could also even go to the cube and look around. But I find that if you look all the way down or all the way up, it can be problematic. You can hit a gimbal lock issue where all of a sudden the camera will start spinning or something because it doesn't know what the if it's at 90 degrees on the X, then it doesn't know what the Y and Z should be exactly. So a good way to fix that is with this clamp vertical rotation. And if you make this say -60 and 60, what that will do for you is now you can look up, but you can't, or down, but you can't look quite all the way, but it still gives you enough range of movement that you can really feel like you're seeing the scene. But it prevents that. It prevents that locking from happening and then having any odd effects from that. So these are actually all going to reset on us because I've been doing this in play mode, but remember, we'll just say 4 and 5 and then -60 for both of those. 4, 5, -60 and 60. So now we've got those settings saved in here, and you can obviously save them to whatever you'd like for your game. But that now gives us control, like I say, so that when we look around, up and down, we can see our entire world all the way around the room here. We can really start, like I say, exploring the space. What's also nice about this now is, say we have a node back here, that's another location, we can now look back here, click on it, and move to it. And that's actually what we're really going to focus on in our next video, which is going to be about expanding our network from what we have right now, which is really just one location and a couple of props, making it much more expansive so that we have different places we can visit, different spots we can go, and different things we can look at. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.